Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the horizon, staring at the view screen with wide eyes. The ship before them was unlike anything humanity had ever built. It curved and flowed like a living creature, its surface shimmering with colors that seemed impossible. Blues and greens rippled across the hull in patterns that made his head hurt if he looked too long. "Captain, they're hailing us," Lieutenant Chen said from the communications station. Her voice trembled slightly. This was the moment humanity had dreamed about for centuries. They were not alone in the universe. Jake took a deep breath and straightened his uniform. "Open the channel." The screen flickered, and a face appeared. Jake tried not to stare. The being looked somewhat like a large salamander, with smooth blue skin and enormous eyes that seemed to glow from within. When it spoke, the translation software turned its words into perfect English. "Greetings, travelers. I am Ambassador Krell of the Veor people. We welcome you to the greater galaxy." Dr. Lisa Grant stepped forward from her station. She had prepared for this moment her entire career. "Ambassador Krell, I am Dr. Lisa Grant. This is Captain Jake Morrison. We come in peace from the planet Earth. We are honored to meet you." The ambassador's wide mouth curved into what might have been a smile. "Earth. Yes, we have been watching your system. Your technological progress has been remarkable. Please, would you join us aboard our vessel? We have much to discuss." 6 hours later, Jake and Lisa sat in a conference room that seemed grown rather than built. The walls curved organically and the furniture adjusted itself to their bodies. Ambassador Krell had served them drinks that tasted like vanilla and starlight, if such a thing were possible. "Your species is fascinating," Krell said, his large eyes studying them. "In just 200 years, you went from basic flight to faster-than-light travel. Most species take 1,000 years or more." Lisa smiled proudly. "Humans are very determined. When we set our minds to something, we don't give up." Krell's expression changed slightly. "Yes, I have been reading your historical databases. You were generous to share them." He paused, and Jake noticed his hands were shaking. "Dr. Grant, Captain Morrison, I must ask you something. Your history is filled with war. Constant war. Wars over land, over resources, over ideas, over religion. Your people have fought each other for your entire existence." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "Ambassador, that's our past. We've been at peace for nearly 50 years now. We've learned from our mistakes." "Have you?" Krell's voice was gentle but firm. "Forgive me, but no species in the Galactic Council has a history like yours. My people had 3 wars in our entire history before we reached space. 3. Your databases show you've had thousands of wars, Captain Morrison." Lisa leaned forward. "Ambassador, I understand your concern, but that's exactly why we're peaceful now. We know the cost of war. We've seen it, lived it, learned from it. We don't want to fight anymore." Krell stood and walked to a window showing the stars. "I want to believe you, Dr. Grant, but I must bring this to the Galactic Council. They will need to decide if humanity is ready to join the greater community." 3 weeks later, Jake and Lisa stood in the Grand Council chamber. The room was enormous, with representatives from 12 different species seated in a circular arrangement. Some looked vaguely humanoid. Others were so alien that Jake couldn't even figure out which end was the head. High Counselor Then, a tall being made of what looked like living crystal, spoke in a voice like wind chimes. "We have reviewed your application for membership. We have also reviewed your history. Humanity, we are troubled." Jake stepped forward. "Counselor, we understand your concerns, but we've changed. We're not the same species we were centuries ago." A insectoid counselor clicked its mandibles. "Not the same? Your most recent global conflict ended only 70 years ago." You used atomic weapons. You killed millions of your own kind. This is not ancient history. Which is exactly why we'll never do it again, Lisa said firmly. We saw what those weapons could do. We saw what war truly costs. Every human child learns about these horrors. We remember so we never repeat it. Counselor Then's crystalline body chimed softly. The Council has debated for many hours. We will allow humanity provisional membership. You may trade with us, learn from us, and participate in cultural exchanges. However, you will be monitored closely. If you show any signs of aggression, any signs that your violent nature is returning, you will be quarantined to your own system. Jake wanted to argue, to defend humanity's honor, but Lisa touched his arm gently. We understand, Counselor. Thank you for this opportunity. We won't disappoint you. As they left the chamber, Ambassador Krell approached them. I spoke in your favor, he said quietly. I told them you deserve a chance. But Captain Morris and Dr. Grant, you must understand something. The species in the Council have known peace for thousands of years. Real peace. They don't understand war the way you do. They've forgotten what it means to fight for survival. Is that a bad thing? Lisa asked. Krell's glowing eyes dimmed slightly. I don't know. I truly don't know. Part of me hopes you've really changed, that you've left your violence behind. But another part of me wonders what will happen if something threatens the Council. Something that doesn't want peace. Something that only understands violence. He paused. Would the Council even know how to respond? Or would they be helpless, like children facing a storm? Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You think something like that could happen? The galaxy is vast, Captain. We've only explored a small part of it. And yes, there are old stories, legends of creatures that nearly destroyed the Council 3,000 years ago. But these are just stories, myths told to children. Krell's expression was hard to read. At least I hope they're just stories. That night, aboard the Horizon, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Krell's words. The Council species had forgotten war. They had lived in peace for so long that they didn't remember how to fight. Humanity remembered. Humanity would always remember. He stared out at the stars and wondered if that made humans the galaxy's greatest danger or its last hope. Perhaps, he thought, it would be both. Commander Ben Hayes sat in the Council's military liaison office, reading reports that made his blood run cold. 3 colonies had gone silent in the past week. No distress calls, no evacuation attempts, just silence. When scout ships arrived, they found nothing but debris and bodies. Commander Hayes, the Council is convening an emergency session, his assistant said. They're requesting your presence. Ben grabbed his tablet and headed to the chamber. 6 months had passed since humanity joined the Council, and he'd spent most of that time trying to explain basic military concepts to species that hadn't fought a war in millennia. It was like teaching fish to climb trees. The Council chamber buzzed with anxious chatter. High Counselor Then's crystalline body flickered with unusual colors. A sign of stress Ben had learned to recognize. Order, please, Then chimed. We have received disturbing news. Colony 7, Colony 12, and the mining station at Kelvar have all been destroyed. The attacks happened within hours of each other. We have recovered some security footage from automated satellites. The lights dimmed, and a hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. Ben watched as massive ships, black as the void itself, emerged from nowhere. They were organic-looking, covered in what seemed like armor plating made from bone and metal fused together. The ships moved with purpose, firing weapons that tore through station shields like paper. "My God," Ben whispered. The footage showed screaming colonists running for escape pods. The black ships ignored the fleeing vessels at first, focusing on destroying the stations. Then, almost casually, they picked off the escape pods one by one. No survivors, no mercy, "Does anyone recognize these ships?" then asked. An elderly counselor, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish, pulsed with dim light. "I have seen such ships in the ancient archives. These are Ravagers. But that's impossible. They were destroyed 3,000 years ago." "Apparently not," Ben said, standing up. "Counselor Then, we need to prepare defenses immediately. These attacks were coordinated and efficient. This is an invasion force." Counselor Vex, an insectoid with a sharp voice, clicked his mandibles. "Commander Hayes, your species sees war in everything. Perhaps these are merely territorial disputes. We should attempt communication first." Ben stared at him in disbelief. "Communication?" "Counselor, did you watch the same footage I did? They destroyed 3 colonies and killed every living being. They shot down escape pods with children inside." "Which is why we must understand their grievance," another counselor added. "All conflicts can be resolved through dialogue." Back on Earth, Admiral Susan Clark listened to Ben's report with growing frustration. She stood in the war room, surrounded by screens showing star maps and fleet positions. "They want to talk to these Ravagers?" she said. "Ben, you told them talking won't work, right?" "I did, Admiral. They overruled me. The Council is voting tomorrow on whether to send a diplomatic convoy or prepare military defenses. I think we both know which way they'll vote." Susan rubbed her temples. "Keep me informed. And Ben, start preparing contingency plans. If this goes the way I think it will, we'll need to be ready to move fast." "Admiral, the Council has forbidden us from military preparations. They said it would send the wrong message." "I didn't ask what the Council said. I gave you an order, Commander." Ben smiled slightly. "Understood, Admiral. Hayes out." 2 days later, Lieutenant Kevin Price sat at his monitoring station on Science Outpost Gamma. It was boring work, tracking asteroids and recording stellar phenomena. He'd been on this station for 8 months and was counting down the days until his rotation ended. "Kevin, are you seeing this?" His partner, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, pointed at her screen. "There's something on the sensors, multiple contacts heading right for us." Kevin pulled up the data. His heart began to race. "Those are ships. Big ones. Sarah, send a distress signal now." Before she could respond, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. The station shook violently. "They're firing on us!" Sarah screamed. Kevin grabbed her arm. "Escape pods, now!" They ran through corridors as explosions tore through the station. Other crew members fled in panic. Kevin saw Dr. Peters, the station commander, helping an injured technician. Then the corridor behind them exploded, and they were gone. Kevin and Sarah reached the pod bay. Half the pods were already gone. They jumped into the nearest one and launched. Through the small window, Kevin watched as the massive black ships tore his home apart. The station broke in half, spilling debris and bodies into space. "They're targeting the pods," Sarah said, her voice hollow. Kevin watched in horror as ship after ship picked off the fleeing pods with casual precision. It was like watching someone swat flies. No rush, no anger, just methodical extermination. "We need to get to that debris field," Kevin said. "Cut the engines and drift. Maybe they'll miss us." Sarah killed the power. Their pod went dark and silent, floating among the wreckage. Through the window, Kevin could see the Ravager ships moving through the remains of the station. They were searching for survivors. He held his breath as one of the massive vessels passed close to their pod. It was even more terrifying up close. The hull seemed to pulse as if alive. Weapons ports opened and closed like mouths. For a moment, Kevin was certain they'd been spotted. Then the ship moved on, joining the others as they departed as suddenly as they'd arrived. Kevin and Sarah floated in the dark for 6 hours before a Council rescue ship found them. By then, Kevin had watched the security footage from the station's external cameras 20 times. He'd seen how the Ravagers fought, how they moved, how they showed no interest in communication or negotiation. When they brought him before the council, still wearing his torn uniform, he told them everything. Counselors. These beings don't want to talk. They never attempted contact. They never responded to our hails. They just killed everyone and left. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is extermination. Counselor Vex studied him with multifaceted eyes. Lieutenant Price, you were traumatized by this event. Perhaps you misunderstood their intentions. Misunderstood? Kevin's voice rose. They shot children. They hunted down escape pods for sport. What part of that am I misunderstanding? High Counselor Then chimed softly. Lieutenant, we understand your anger. However, we have voted to proceed with diplomatic contact. A convoy will be sent to establish communication with these Ravagers. We have survived for thousands of years through peace. We will not abandon that now. Kevin looked at Commander Hayes, who stood at the back of the chamber. The older man's face was grim. Kevin understood then. The council would learn their lesson, but the cost would be paid in blood. When diplomacy fails, Kevin said quietly, and it will fail, what then? Then we will try again, Counselor Then replied. Peace is always possible, Lieutenant, always. Kevin walked out of the chamber and found Commander Hayes waiting for him. They're going to get a lot of people killed, aren't they? Kevin asked. Hayes put a hand on his shoulder. Yes, but maybe that's what it takes. Maybe they need to see what real evil looks like before they understand that some things can't be reasoned with. And then? Hayes looked at the stars visible through the station windows. Then they'll call us, and they'll learn what humans do when diplomacy fails. Ambassador Troy Mason believed in peace above all else. He'd spent his entire career negotiating treaties, resolving conflicts, and finding common ground between opposing sides. When the council asked for a human representative to join their diplomatic mission to the Ravagers, he volunteered immediately. Troy, this is a mistake, Commander Hayes said as they stood in the shuttle bay. These things aren't like anything we've dealt with before. They're killers. Troy smiled patiently. Ben, every enemy looks like a monster until you talk to them. Every war happens because someone refused to communicate. I won't make that mistake. Captain Nina Ross, who would command the escort fleet, shook her head. Ambassador, I've read Lieutenant Price's report. I've seen the footage. These Ravagers didn't try to talk. They just killed. Which means we haven't tried hard enough, Troy insisted. The Council has assembled representatives from all 12 species. We're bringing gifts, cultural exchanges, and offers of trade. If that doesn't work, we'll keep trying. Peace is always possible. Nina exchanged a glance with Ben. They both knew Troy was wrong, but orders were orders. I'll keep you safe as long as I can. Ambassador. The diplomatic convoy consisted of 30 ships. 20 were filled with council representatives, diplomats, and peace offerings. 10 were escorts, including Nina's ship, the Starlight. It was the largest peaceful gathering the council had assembled in centuries. Elder diplomat Shen, a being that looked like a walking tree with wisdom in every ancient branch, led the mission. He'd lived for 400 years and had never failed to find peace. He believed this time would be no different. Greg Palmer, the intelligence officer assigned to Nina's ship, wasn't so optimistic. He'd spent weeks analyzing every piece of data on the Ravagers. The results terrified him. Captain Ross, you need to see this, he said, pulling up holographic displays in the briefing room. I've analyzed 17 attacks now. The Ravagers never deviate from their pattern. They arrive, destroy everything, and leave. They don't respond to hails. They don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. What are you saying, Greg? I'm saying this mission is suicide. These things aren't like us. They might not even think like us. They could be machines or a hive mind or something we can't understand. But one thing is certain. They're not interested in talking. Nina looked at the data and felt cold. "I've already sent my concerns to the council. They said to proceed as planned." "Then God help us all." The convoy reached the designated coordinates 3 days later. It was a neutral zone in deep space, far from any colonies or stations. High Counselor Then had sent messages ahead, explaining that the convoy came in peace and wished to establish dialogue. Troy stood on the bridge of the lead diplomatic vessel, surrounded by representatives from a dozen species. Everyone wore their finest ceremonial robes. They'd prepared speeches in multiple languages. They'd brought gifts representing the best of council culture: art, music, technology, and food. "Any response to our messages?" Troy asked. "Nothing, Ambassador," the communications officer replied. "We've been broadcasting on all frequencies for 6 hours. No acknowledgement." Elder Diplomat Shen's branches rustled softly. "Patience. They may need time to consider our offer. First contact is always delicate." On the starlight, Nina watched her sensors with growing dread. "Greg, are you seeing this?" "Multiple contacts, incoming fast. Captain, that's not a diplomatic response, that's an attack formation." Nina hit the alert button. "All ships, this is Captain Ross. Battle stations now, diplomatic vessels, begin emergency retreat procedures." But it was too late. The Ravager ships appeared like demons from nightmare. Dozens of them, their black hulls seeming to absorb light itself. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. The lead ships opened fire before anyone could react. Troy watched in disbelief as the first diplomatic vessel exploded. "No, wait! We're here to talk! We come in peace!" The Ravagers didn't care. Elder Diplomat Shen broadcast on all frequencies, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We mean you no harm. We offer friendship and cooperation. Please respond!" A Ravager ship answered by firing directly at his vessel. The shot tore through the bridge, and the Elder's final thought was one of complete incomprehension. In 400 years, he'd never encountered a being that wouldn't talk. He died not understanding that such beings could exist. Nina threw her ship into a defensive pattern, trying to shield the diplomatic vessels. "All escorts, cover the retreat. Buy them time to escape." The escort ships formed a desperate line, their shields flaring as Ravager weapons pounded them. It was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a paper wall. One by one, the escorts began to fall. Troy's ship shook violently. Alarms screamed. Through the view screen, he watched as Ravager vessels methodically destroyed every diplomatic ship. They moved with the efficiency of machines, showing no emotion, no hesitation, no mercy. "Evacuate! Everyone to the escape pods!" Troy shouted. The crew fled in panic. Troy helped an injured Veor diplomat to a pod before climbing in himself. As they launched, he saw Nina's ship, the Starlight, take 3 direct hits. One engine exploded, but Nina kept fighting, giving the escape pods time to scatter. Then Troy's pod was tumbling through space, and he could only watch as the Ravagers hunted down the fleeing vessels. They were thorough, he realized with horror. They weren't letting anyone escape. His pod shook as a shot passed close by. Troy closed his eyes and waited for the end. It never came. When he opened them, he saw Nina's ship moving between his pod and the Ravagers. The Starlight was dying, trailing fire and atmosphere, but Nina was using her last moments to save as many pods as possible. "This is Captain Ross to all surviving pods," her voice crackled over the radio. "I'm going to ram the nearest Ravager ship. It should give you a few seconds. Use them. Run. Tell them what happened here. Tell them peace isn't always possible." Troy watched as the Starlight accelerated on its final trajectory. The ship slammed into a Ravager vessel at full speed, both ships exploding in a ball of white fire. In the chaos, some escape pods managed to slip away into the darkness. Troy's pod drifted for 3 days before a council patrol found them. Of the 30 ships that had gone to seek peace, only 8 pods survived. 473 beings had died, including Elder Diplomat Shen and Captain Nina Ross. The greatest diplomatic mission in Council history had become its greatest massacre. When they brought Troy before the Council, he no longer looked like a man who believed peace was always possible. His hands shook as he played the recording he'd made from his escape pod. "They never tried to communicate," he said, his voice hollow. "Not once. We offered them everything, and they just killed us." Elder Shen died confused, unable to comprehend that something wouldn't talk. Captain Ross died buying us time to escape. The council chamber was silent. These beings had known peace for thousands of years. They'd built a civilization on the idea that all conflicts could be resolved through dialogue. Now they faced a truth they'd forgotten. Some things can't be reasoned with. High Counselor Then's crystalline body had turned dark, almost black. The Council recognizes that diplomacy has failed. We must now consider military options. However, we have not fought a war in 3,000 years. Our ships are not built for combat. Our people do not know how to fight. Counselor Vex, who had argued most strongly for diplomacy, spoke quietly. "There is one species among us who remembers war, one species who has not forgotten how to fight." All eyes turned to Commander Ben Hayes. "The humans," Then said softly. "You warned us this would happen." Ben stood. "Yes, we did. And now you understand why our history is what it is. We've faced beings like this before. Maybe not from space, but we know what it means to fight for survival against an enemy that won't negotiate." "Will you help us?" Ben looked at the faces around him. Fear, desperation, and hope mixed together. "I'll contact Earth. Admiral Clark will want to speak with you directly. But counselors, if we do this, if humans enter this fight, you need to understand something." "What is that?" "Commander, war isn't clean. It isn't noble. People will die, including humans. We'll do things that will horrify you. We'll make choices that seem cruel, but we'll win, because that's what humans do. We survive." He paused. "The question is, are you ready to see what humans become when we go to war?" The council voted unanimously. They were ready. They had no other choice. Admiral Susan Clark stood before the Galactic Council, flanked by 20 human officers. Behind them, visible through the massive windows, was humanity's response to the Council's plea for help: the Earth Defense Fleet. 20 warships that had been built in secret over the past year, painted in gray and black, bristling with weapons. "These are your warships?" Counselor Vex asked, his voice uncertain. "These are warships," Susan replied. "Not exploration vessels or not cargo haulers. These ships have one purpose: to kill enemy vessels and protect friendly ones. They're equipped with weapons you've never seen because you've never needed them." High Counselor Then chimed nervously. "Admiral Clark, we are grateful for your assistance. However, we have concerns. Our military coordinators have reviewed your tactical proposals and found them disturbing." "I'm sure you did," Susan said flatly. "Let me guess. You're worried about acceptable casualty rates, flanking maneuvers, and false retreats. You think our tactics are too aggressive, too violent, too unpredictable." "Yes," Then admitted. "Your battle plans include intentional ramming, boarding actions, and something called tactical sacrifice. These concepts are alien to us." Captain Jake Morrison stepped forward. "With respect, Counselor, that's exactly why you're losing. The Ravagers are advancing on your core worlds because they know you won't fight like they do. They know you'll retreat when damaged, regroup when scattered, and always choose the safe option. That predictability is getting your people killed." Dr. Lisa Grant, now serving as psychological warfare specialist, activated a hologram. "We've analyzed every Ravager attack. They're efficient, but they're also predictable in their own way. They expect rational behavior. They expect their enemies to value survival above victory. Humans don't always do that." "That's madness," a counselor whispered. No, Commander Ben Hayes said. That's war, and you asked us to fight it for you. Ambassador Krell, who'd been observing silently, spoke up. Counselors, I've spent a year studying humans. I've read their military history, watched recordings of their wars, and interviewed their veterans. They're right. If we fight this war the way we're comfortable with, we'll lose. We need to let them do what they do best, even if it terrifies us. 3 weeks later, the first human-led battle took place at the mining world of Caldris. The Ravagers had been besieging the planet for days, and Council forces were in full retreat. Then the human fleet arrived. Jake stood on the bridge of his ship, the Phoenix, watching the tactical display. 12 Ravager vessels surrounded Caldris, slowly grinding down the planet's defenses. Council ships hung back at a safe distance, their commanders paralyzed by fear. All human ships, this is Captain Morrison. You know the plan. We're not here to play it safe. We're here to show these Ravagers that humanity doesn't scare easily. Engineering, I want maximum power to forward shields. Weapons, arm everything. Helm, plot a course directly through the enemy formation. His bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. No hesitation, no questioning. They'd trained for this. Sir, the Council ships are hailing us, his communications officer said. They're asking if we're insane. Tell them to watch and learn. All ships execute Plan Alpha. Let's introduce these Ravagers to human warfare. The 20 human ships accelerated directly toward the Ravager fleet. The Council commanders watched in horror, certain they were witnessing a suicide run. The Ravagers, detecting the incoming ships, adjusted their formation to engage. Then the humans did something completely unexpected. Instead of maintaining their formation, each ship began moving independently, executing rolls, dives, and banks that should have been impossible for vessels their size. They moved like fighters, not capital ships. Jake's ship dove under a Ravager vessel, scraping so close that alarms screamed. Weapons! Fire all dorsal cannons directly into their belly! The Phoenix's guns tore into the Ravager's unprotected underside at point-blank range. The enemy ship's shields, designed to protect against frontal assault, failed. Explosions rippled across its hull. Hard to port! Ram the port side thruster cluster! Sir, that will damage our engines. I know. Do it! The Phoenix slammed into the Ravager vessel. Jake's ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as systems failed, but the Ravager's maneuvering thrusters exploded, sending it spinning out of control. Boarding teams! Go! Hatches blew open, and human Marines in combat armor launched themselves into the void. They crossed the gap using jetpacks, magnetic boots locking onto the damaged Ravager hull. Within minutes, they'd breached the enemy ship and were fighting inside. Across the battlefield, similar chaos unfolded. Human ships fought in ways the Ravagers had never encountered. One captain deliberately vented his atmosphere to put out a fire, then kept fighting. Another ran his engines into the red zone until they nearly melted, achieving impossible acceleration to avoid incoming fire. A third ship took heavy damage, but used the explosion as cover to get close enough for boarding. On Caldris, defenders and refugees watched through telescopes and sensors. They saw human ships taking damage that should have destroyed them but continuing to fight. They saw humans deliberately putting themselves in danger to protect Council vessels. Lieutenant Kevin Price, now serving aboard the Phoenix, led the boarding team inside the Ravager ship. The interior was nightmare fuel, organic walls that pulsed like living tissue, corridors that seemed to breathe, and defenders that looked like a fusion of machine and monster. "Contact!" his sergeant yelled. Ravager warriors charged at them. They were massive, armored creatures with too many limbs and weapons built into their bodies. They looked unstoppable. Kevin and his team opened fire, and the Ravagers discovered that humans didn't retreat when faced with monsters. The battle became a brutal, close-quarters nightmare. Humans fought in corridors barely wide enough to move, using grenades, combat knives, and sheer determination. When a Marine ran out of ammunition, they kept fighting with whatever they could find. When wounded, they provided covering fire for their squad mates instead of seeking safety. Kevin took a hit to his shoulder but kept moving. "Plant the charges! We're taking this ship as a prize!" They fought their way to the Ravager bridge. The ship's commanders were massive beings, more machine than organic, controlling the vessel through neural links. They seemed shocked that anything could penetrate this deep. Kevin shot the primary commander 3 times, then planted demolition charges on the control systems. "All teams fall back! Ship is secured!" Back on the Phoenix Bridge, Jake watched as 30% of his fleet reported critical damage. They'd lost 2 ships entirely, their crews dying to protect Council vessels. But the Ravagers were retreating. For the first time since the war began, the enemy was running. "Should we pursue, Captain?" his tactical officer asked. "No! Let them run! Let them tell their friends what happened here!" Ambassador Krell watched the battle from a Council observation ship. His hands shook as he recorded his official report. He spoke into his recorder, his voice filled with awe and horror. "The humans fought like nothing I've ever witnessed. They took damage that should have killed them and kept fighting. They deliberately damaged their own ships to gain tactical advantages. They boarded enemy vessels and fought in hand-to-hand combat against creatures twice their size. And they won." He paused, watching as human ships limped back to defensive positions, trailing fire and atmosphere. But the cost? They lost hundreds of crew members, 2 entire ships destroyed, 30% casualty rate, and they're celebrating because they consider this a victory. What kind of species considers 30% losses acceptable? High Counselor Then's voice came over the comm. "Ambassador Krell, we've received reports from other battle zones. Human ships are engaging Ravagers across 6 sectors. They're winning everywhere they fight. But the casualties—" "I know," Krell said softly. "They're dying to protect us. And they're doing it gladly because that's what they are. Warriors. Not because they want to be, but because someone has to be." He looked at the battered human ships. "Other Council species are calling them reckless, suicidal, insane. But I think I finally understand. Humans aren't reckless. They're just willing to pay prices we're not. They'll trade their lives for victory because they know what happens if they lose." On the Phoenix, Jake walked through Medical Bay, visiting his wounded crew. They'd won, but the cost was high. He stopped at each bed, thanking each person personally. These were good people who'd signed up to explore the stars, not to die in battle. But when called, they'd fought like demons. "Captain," a wounded Marine said, her voice weak. "Did we scare them? Did we show them humans don't quit?" Jake smiled. "Yeah, we did. The Ravagers are running scared. They've never fought anyone like us." "Good," she said, closing her eyes. "Make them regret ever coming to our galaxy." In the Ravager command ship, far from the battle, the hive mind analyzed what had happened at Caldrus. For the first time in their species' history, they'd encountered prey that fought back with genuine ferocity. These humans were small, fragile, and technologically inferior. But they were also unpredictable, aggressive, and seemingly fearless. The hive mind adjusted its strategies. It began avoiding systems where human ships patrolled. It started treating human vessels not as targets, but as threats. Within weeks, the Ravager advance had slowed. Within months, they were actively retreating from sectors where humans operated. The Council species watched all of this with mixed emotions. Relief that the Ravagers were finally being stopped. Fear of what humanity had become in just a few short months, and a growing understanding that they owed their survival to a species they'd almost rejected for being too violent. Ambassador Krell's report concluded with words that would echo through Council history. "We survived because humans knew how to fight. But now we must ask ourselves, have we created saviors, or have we unleashed something equally dangerous?" 6 months of war had changed everything. Admiral Susan Clark stood in the command center, studying star maps that showed a very different galaxy than the one she'd known. Red markers indicated Ravager-controlled space, and those markers were shrinking daily. Blue markers showed human-led forces pushing deeper into enemy territory, but the cost was visible in the casualty reports scrolling across her secondary screen. Earth had committed everything to this war. 40,000 humans had died. Ships were being built as fast as the shipyards could produce them, only to be destroyed weeks later in desperate battles. Entire families had lost sons and daughters to the void. "Admiral, the Council is requesting a strategy meeting," her aide said. "They want to discuss the final assault on the Ravager home system." Susan nodded, pulling up the intelligence reports. The Ravagers had retreated to their stronghold, a massive fortress built into an asteroid field. It was defended by 200 warships and countless automated defenses. Taking it would be a bloodbath. Commander Ben Hayes entered the war room with Captain Jake Morrison. Jake's ship, the Phoenix, had been destroyed 3 weeks ago. He'd escaped with 30% of his crew and immediately requested command of a new vessel. "Admiral, we've been training Council forces in human tactics," Ben reported. "They're learning, but it's slow. Most species still hesitate when they should attack, retreat when they should push forward. They're not wired for this kind of warfare." "Can't blame them," Jake said. "They've had peace for 3,000 years. We're asking them to become killers overnight." Susan pulled up holographic displays of the Ravager stronghold. "Gentlemen, this is their last stand. Intelligence suggests they've pulled everything back to defend this system. If we break them here, the war is over. But it's going to cost us." "How much?" Ben asked quietly. "Estimates put our casualties at 60%. Maybe higher." The room fell silent. 60% meant thousands more dead humans. It meant ships destroyed, families shattered, futures ended. "There's no other way?" Jake asked. "Not if we want to win decisively. A siege would take years and give them time to rebuild. A gradual assault would cost even more lives in the long run. The only way to end this is a massive, coordinated strike that breaks their defenses in one overwhelming assault." Ben looked at the casualty projections. "The Council won't like this." "The Council doesn't have to like it. They asked us to win this war. This is what winning looks like." High Counselor Then and the other counselors gathered in the chamber. Ambassador Krell stood with them as Admiral Clark presented the assault plan. The silence that followed was heavy with dread. "You're proposing a suicide mission," Counselor Vex said finally. "I'm proposing a victory," Susan corrected. "Yes, many will die. That's the nature of war. But if we succeed, the Ravager threat ends forever. Your species will be safe." "At what cost to humanity?" Then asked. "Admiral, your species has lost so much already. How many more must die?" Susan's expression hardened. "As many as it takes. That's what you asked us for, isn't it? You wanted warriors. You wanted someone who understood war. Well, this is what war is. It's sacrifice. It's loss. It's paying terrible prices for necessary victories." Dr. Lisa Grant stepped forward. "Counselors, we've been analyzing the psychological impact of this war on your populations. Your people are traumatized by what they've witnessed. They're not used to violence on this scale." "But they're also alive because humans were willing to do what you couldn't." "We never asked you to die for us," a counselor said softly. "You did," Commander Hayes replied. "The moment you asked us to fight your war. That's what combat means. People die so others can live. It's not pretty, but it's reality." The council voted to approve the assault, but as they did, Krell noticed something in the human officers' faces. They weren't eager for battle. They weren't glorying in violence. They looked tired, sad, and resigned. These were people doing a terrible job because someone had to do it. The assault fleet assembled 3 weeks later. 300 ships from a dozen species, but the spearhead was purely human. 25 warships that would lead the charge directly into the heart of enemy defenses. Aboard those ships were 15,000 human souls who knew most of them wouldn't survive the day. Captain Nina Ross's younger sister, Kelly Ross, commanded one of those lead ships. She'd watched the recording of her sister's death 100 times, watching Nina sacrifice herself to save others. Now, Kelly would honor that sacrifice by finishing the job. Jake Morrison commanded the flagship Valiant. He stood on the bridge, looking at his crew. Young faces, scared faces, determined faces. They knew what was coming. "Listen up," he said over the ship-wide comm. "In a few hours, we're going to fly straight into hell. The Ravagers are going to throw everything they have at us. A lot of us aren't coming back. But that's okay, because the people we're protecting will live. The council species, the colonies, the billions of beings who just want to live in peace. They'll survive because we're willing to do this." He paused. "I'm proud to serve with you. Whatever happens today, remember that we're not fighting because we love war. We're fighting because someone has to, and we're the only ones who can. Let's show them what humanity is made of." The fleet jumped into the Ravager system together. The enemy was waiting. 200 black ships hung in a defensive sphere around their fortress. Automated weapons platforms filled the space between. It was a killing field designed to destroy any attacking force. "All human ships, full speed ahead," Susan ordered from the command ship. "Don't stop, don't slow down. Punch through their lines and hit the fortress." The human ships accelerated to maximum speed, shields forward. Ravager weapons fire filled the space with deadly light. The first human ship died within seconds, torn apart by concentrated fire. The second followed moments later, but the remaining ships kept coming. They fired as they charged, their weapons tearing into enemy formations. They didn't try to dodge or evade. They just drove forward like missiles, trading their survival for every meter of ground gained. Kelly Ross's ship took 3 direct hits. Her shields failed and fire spread through 2 decks. "All hands! Damage control! Keep us moving!" Her ship shuddered as an explosion tore through engineering. Half her engines went dead. They were slowing down, becoming an easier target. "Captain, we're not going to make it to the fortress," her tactical officer said. Kelly looked at the display. She was right. They'd never survive long enough to deliver their payload. But there was another option. "Calculate a ramming course. Target that weapons platform. If we take it out, the ships behind us will have a clear path." Her crew worked without hesitation. They'd all known this might come. The ship turned, accelerating on its remaining engines directly toward a massive Ravager weapons platform. "All hands! Abandon ship," Kelly ordered. "Get to the escape pods." "Captain, you need to go too," her first officer said. Kelly smiled. "Someone needs to keep her on course. Go. Tell them what we did here." As her crew fled to the pods, Kelly sat in the captain's chair, alone on the bridge. She thought about her sister Nina, who'd made this same choice months ago. She thought about Earth, about blue skies and green grass, about a life she'd never have. Her ship slammed into the weapons platform at full speed. The explosion was visible from the command ship, a new star being born and dying in an instant. But the weapons platform went silent, and the ships behind her surged through the gap. Jake's ship made it to the fortress. They'd lost 12 ships just getting here, thousands dead. But they were at the enemy's throat now. "Deploy boarding teams. We're taking this fortress apart from the inside." Human Marines launched from every surviving ship, swarming the fortress like ants attacking a giant. They breached the hull in 100 places, pouring into the corridors. The Ravagers fought desperately, but humans had become experts at close-quarters combat. Lieutenant Kevin Price, now a major, led the assault on the Fortress Command Center. His team fought through biological nightmares and automated defenses. When they reached the center, they found the Ravager Queen, a massive being that controlled the entire hive through neural connections. The Queen was ancient and terrifying, but she was also mortal. Kevin planted charges around the command center and gave his team 30 seconds to evacuate. He stayed behind to ensure the charges detonated properly. The explosion destroyed the Queen and sent a psychic shockwave through every Ravager in the system. Without their Queen, the Ravagers became disorganized. Their coordinated defense collapsed. Human and Council ships tore through them. Within hours, the battle was over. Admiral Susan Clark watched the casualty reports come in. 62% losses. 15,000 humans had entered that system. Only 5,700 survived. The names scrolled past on her screen, each one a life ended, a future stolen. Jake Morrison was among the survivors, though his ship had been evacuated and destroyed. Kevin Price was listed as killed in action. Kelly Ross, gone. Hundreds of others Susan had known personally. "Admiral, the Council is hailing you," her aide said gently. "They want to speak with you." Susan activated the comm. High Counselor Then appeared, his crystalline body glowing with colors she'd never seen before. Colors that meant profound grief and gratitude mixed together. "Admiral Clark, the war is over. The Ravagers are broken. You did what you promised. You won." "At what cost, Counselor?" "A cost humanity bore so others wouldn't have to." "Admiral, the Council wishes to discuss humanity's permanent role in galactic affairs. We believe Earth should become our military protectorate, responsible for defending Council space." Susan felt anger flash through her. "You want us to be your attack dogs? Your weapons to point at enemies?" "No," Then said softly. "We want you to be what you've always been, survivors who refuse to let evil triumph. We need that, Admiral. The galaxy needs that. We've learned that peace must be protected, and we cannot protect it alone." Susan was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We'll agree to train your forces. We'll agree to coordinate defense. But we won't be your mercenaries, Counselor. If humans fight, it's because we choose to, not because you order it. We'll be partners or nothing at all." "Partners, then," Then agreed. Ambassador Krell entered Susan's office later that day. He carried a datapad containing his final report on humanity. "Admiral, I've been documenting this war from the beginning. I've watched humans fight, die, and sacrifice everything for people they barely knew. I need you to understand something. When we first met you, we were terrified of your violence. We thought you were dangerous monsters barely contained." "And now?" Susan asked. "Now I know the truth. You are dangerous. You are capable of terrible violence. But you're also capable of terrible sacrifice. You're the wolves that guard the sheep, not because you want to eat them, but because you know what real monsters look like." He set down the datapad. "This report will be taught to every Council child for the next 1,000 years. They'll learn what humans did for us. They'll learn what real courage looks like." 20 years later, the Council had changed. Every species maintained a military now, trained by humans in the art of defensive warfare. Young beings from a dozen species trained at the new military academy on Earth, learning tactics from veterans who'd fought the Ravagers. Jake Morrison, now Admiral Morrison, walked through the academy grounds. He was older, grayer, and carried the weight of command. But he smiled seeing students from different species working together, learning how to protect what they loved. A young Veor cadet approached him nervously. "Admiral Morrison, sir, I wanted to thank you. My grandmother survived because of what humans did during the war, because of what you did." Jake put a hand on the cadet's shoulder. "We did what was necessary. Now it's your turn. Learn these skills, but pray you never need them. Be ready for war so you can preserve peace." "Yes, sir. We won't forget what humans taught us." As the cadet left, Ambassador Krell, now ancient and near the end of his long life, joined Jake. "Do you think it will last? The peace?" Jake looked at the stars. "Maybe. Probably not forever. But that's okay. We've taught them how to defend themselves, how to fight when they must. They're not helpless anymore. And humans? What will you become now? You've been warriors for so long. We'll be what we've always tried to be, Jake said. Explorers, scientists, dreamers. We didn't want to be warriors, Krell. We became warriors because someone had to. Now maybe we can go back to just being human. Krell made a sound like wind chimes, his species' version of laughter. You can never go back. Jake, none of us can. We're all changed by what happened. But perhaps that's not a bad thing. Perhaps the galaxy needed to remember that peace has a price, and sometimes that price must be paid in blood. They stood together, human and alien, veteran and witness, watching the next generation learn the lessons paid for in the lives of thousands. The war was over, but its legacy would echo through the stars for millennia. Humanity had proven they were worthy of joining the galactic community, not despite their violent nature, but because they knew how to channel that violence in defense of those who couldn't defend themselves. And in the deep reaches of space, on the edges of known territory, human ships continued their patrols, silent guardians watching the darkness, ready to fight again if necessary, because that's what humans did. They protected, they sacrificed, they endured. The aliens had watched in dread as humans entered battle. Now they watched in gratitude as humans kept them safe. And perhaps, in the end, that made all the difference.